like to begin today by telling you a story, but not just any story, it's a preacher story. Now, preacher stories, as I like to call them, are not really about preachers, usually. But instead, they're these stories that preachers like to tell in their sermons to get their point across. And preacher stories are not known for their subtlety. You've been warned. And today I'm going to start off, as I said, with such a story. It goes like this. There was this man who walked into a neighborhood on the first Monday of the month, and he stopped at the first house that he came to, and he knocked at the door. And when the man opened the door, the homeowner opened the door, he explained, "I've come into some money, and I would like to share my good fortune. I'd like to give you $100, if that's okay." "Okay, that's great," said this flabbergasted homeowner. And then this mysterious man handed over a crisp $100 bill and walked out. The next week, on Monday, the same man appeared again, and the homeowner once again received a new $100 bill. And each Monday that month, the man with the money knocked at the door, and that delighted and overjoyed homeowner received a crisp, brand new Benjamin. Then, on the first Monday of the next month, the mysterious philanthropist walked down the sidewalk, but he passed by the first house and went instead to the door of the second house that he came to. "Hey," yelled the homeowner of the first house, "where's my money?" That was it. Come on, it was not subtle. So obviously the story is about fairness, or how we view fairness, or at least what seems to be unfair to this man who's not getting his $100 anymore. And we get it. We understand why he yells, "Hey, where's my money?" But it's not his money. Never was his money. It was a gift. It's free and unexpected and unearned. And now that money, his money, seems to be going to his neighbor, well, he's not real happy about it. Theologically, we would say that for that first month, what the man experienced was grace, unearned and undeserved, a gift from someone just knocking at his door. And it is this same grace that is the subject of our reading for today from the Gospel according to Matthew. And this reading is a parable told by Jesus, and it begins with these words: "For the kingdom of heaven is like." So right off the bat, we know the purpose of this parable. It's revealed. It is to help us gain a better understanding of the kingdom of heaven. And thank you for that, because I need all the help I can get understanding the kingdom. This parable tells us the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, to be clear, the kingdom is not like a landowner, but the kingdom is like this particular moment in time, the juncture of the moment that the landowner hires the day laborers. What happens there? That is what the kingdom is like. So this man goes down to the market where the men looking for work have gathered, and he contracts with the workers that he will pay them the normal daily wage if they will work in his vineyard that day. They agree. He sends them out to work. Then a couple hours later, about 9 o'clock, the same man goes down to the marketplace, and he sees that there are more men standing idle. Now, just to be clear, that word idle is how it's translated in our Bibles, but that's not quite accurate. It means that they were unemployed, that they were standing there because no one had hired them. It's not that they were doing nothing intentionally, but they were standing unemployed. So he goes out to them and he says, I will hire you and I will pay you whatever is right. And so the implication here is that they will be paid for the hours they work. It seems fair. The workers agree, they go out into the vineyard. And then this is repeated again at noon and then also at 3 o'clock. The landowner hires men, sends them out into the vineyard. But now we're getting to the end of the day. It's 5 o'clock, and their work day would go a bit longer, but it's getting close to the end of the day. And he goes back to the market and he sees more men standing unemployed. And he asks them, why are you here all day? And they say, because no one has hired us, obviously. So he sends them into the vineyard, but this time there's no discussion of pay. At the end of the workday, the owner then gathers all those that he's hired and he instructs his manager to pay these people, but he tells the manager to pay the men who are hired last, to pay them first. And so the manager gathers the 5 o'clock crowd, the ones who had only worked an hour or two at the most, and he pays them. And as the owner instructed, he gives them a full day's wage, despite they're only working a fraction of the day. And then he calls in the 3 o'clock group, and they figure, I'm sure they're doing the math in their head, that they're going to get paid more because they've worked longer than the 5 o'clock group. But no, they get the same amount of money. But it's still more than they expected. They get a full day's pay. And this pattern is repeated for those hired at noon and for those hired at 9 o'clock as well. But then the first group arrives, the ones who put in a full day's work, and they figure they've got a windfall coming because they have worked the longest. But no, they're paid the same as everyone else. They receive a day's wage. And when they receive their money, they complain. They say to the owner, those who came last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. So the landowner responds to one of these complainers, and he says, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or is it that you are envious because I have been so generous? And then Jesus wraps this up saying, so the first will be last. I get that wrong every time. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. So in that preacher story that I started with, the man in the first house is upset when he doesn't get his free money. And in the parable, the early workers gripe when they are paid just the same as everyone else, even though they thought they would receive what was owed to them, but more. But they get what they've agreed to. And they agreed on a day's pay. They're not shortchanged at all. It just doesn't seem fair to them that the less deserving would be paid the same. And Jesus uses this parable to describe one extraordinary characteristic of the kingdom of heaven, and that is grace. The kingdom is the embodiment of God's grace. Those who enjoy the benefits of the kingdom do so, not because they've earned it, but because God gives it to them. God walks down the street and hands out those $100 bills. In the parable, the landowner seems to represent God. And we see this in the words that the landowner speaks to the complaining workers when he says, "Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?" God's grace is God's to distribute as God pleases. And against the norms of this world, we see that the last come in first, and the first will be last. But even for us as people of faith, we still expect that people should get what they deserve and no more, unless, of course, it's us getting more. The first, we believe, the first should be first, because that's what first means. But the ways of the kingdom are different. And that's what Jesus is telling us in this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like, not this earth, but something else. The ways of God are based on an economy of grace, where the last can find themselves at the front of the line. Now, if this is how you read this parable, that's wonderful, because this is what it says. In the kingdom of heaven, we can expect to be challenged by grace. However, I would also like to invite you to look at the parable in a different way, to look at it from another angle. So let's think about who the parable is being written to. Who is the audience? Well, it can be a parable for all people, but I think here Jesus is speaking to a very specific audience, and that is his disciples. Because through this entire section of Matthew's gospel, Jesus has been teaching the 12 disciples the meaning of discipleship, and that's continued in this parable. The disciples have been with Jesus since the beginning. They were the first ones that he called. They set aside their lives. They set aside their jobs to follow him. They have worked tirelessly for his ministry, traveling from town to town, caring for people in unending numbers. Of all those who know about Jesus, they've got the longest tenure. They've put in the hours. And they figure they should be first. And just before we've come to this parable, Peter has reminded Jesus of all that they've done when he says, "We left everything and followed you." In the parable, however, Jesus appears to be telling the 12 that while, yes, they are first, in the kingdom, roles can be reversed, and the first will be last. And this is not what they want to hear, and they disagree. I mean, after all, aren't they the ones who have worked hardest in the scorching heat of ministry? How can others who come after them reap the same benefits of the kingdom, or maybe more? They should get the dividends of their work. That would be fair. They're the special ones. They deserve the greatest reward. In this parable, one of the things I find interesting, there's a lot that's interesting here, but one is that complaint, which is brought by the early workers. And their concern was not that the others were paid the same amount of them. I mean, they were irked about that. But what they complain about is that the others have become equal to them. Despite not having worked as long or as hard, they have been lifted up to the same level. And that is the complaint of people of faith who operate within the ways of this world. That seems to be a complaint of the disciples. We should be first, and yet you're making them all equal to us. If I am a faithful person, then I should be lifted up and rewarded for my work above those who are, well, we'll say less faithful. The truly faithful, they should be first, not last. For those who consider themselves first, equality is the last thing that they're going to desire. The parable is relevant for other believers besides the disciples. Matthew, we know, wrote this gospel account for a congregation, his congregation, and it was made up primarily of people who were Jewish, and they were converts to Christianity. And you can be sure that they felt a connection to Jesus through their ancestry. And I imagine there were grumblings among them in the church about those non-Jews, those interlopers coming in and usurping their faith. Jesus was one of them, not an outsider. Jews had been Jews for thousands of years, and these Gentiles were laying claim to the Jewish promise of God's salvation. They're not the chosen ones. We are. The parable of the kingdom is a pointed reminder to the disciples and to Matthew's congregation, and even to us today, that God's promises are meant to be open to all people. In the kingdom, all are first, and those who demand to be at the front of the line might find themselves at the back. And in the parable, the final words of the landowner are a question. He asked the early workers, the ones who are grumbling, "Are you envious because I have been so generous?" That's an amazing question. The landowner is asking if his extreme generosity is a cause for their envy. He's not taking anything away from anyone. He's given everybody exactly what he promised and more. But yet, instead of rejoicing in the goodwill of others, they are envious. Think about our own experience. Is there a time when someone else's generosity made you envious? When you thought, I should be getting more of what they are giving away? Now, the translation of this question that we find in our English Bible is kind of weak. Most Bibles use the word envious to describe what is going on here, but the Greek phrase is much more interesting. It's actually evil eye. And so instead of, are you envious because I am generous, the question should be read, are you looking at me with an evil eye because I am good? Sometimes true generosity directed at others brings up the evil eye from within us. When we witness others receiving something that we feel that they don't deserve, we respond with a dark contempt that rises up out of us like bile. It is an evil that declares that we are better than them and that we deserve more than they do, even though they're not taking anything from us. Our instinct is to do whatever we can to deny the generosity from reaching others. And so we construct fences and walls to separate them from the source of generosity and grace. Jesus closes the parable with the words that perfectly frame the parable's message, the words that I am unable to say today. He says, the last will be first, and the first will be last. And to grasp the power of that statement, we must accept who is last and who is claiming to be first. The first are those who feel they are deserving because of who they are and what they have done. Those who feel that they should get more, those who are resentful of those who have gotten more, too much. They're like the disciples, James and John, who feel that they deserve to be first, sitting next to Jesus. But in the kingdom of heaven, it is the last who are first. The last are not those who are the least. The last are those who put others ahead of them. The last are those whose hearts are governed by generosity. The last are those who exemplify compassion. The last are those who embody forgiveness. The last are those who applaud God's grace wherever they see it in the world. The last are those who lift up the fallen. The last are those whose hearts are filled with love. The last are the first in God's kingdom. Let us be last. Amen.